The small cafe sat on a quiet corner of the city, tucked between old brick buildings and a flower shop that smelled of roses. It was the kind of place people passed by every day without noticing, but inside, it carried its own little world. The clinking of cups, the soft hum of jazz music, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee that wrapped around everyone who entered. Among the waiters and waitresses rushing between tables, there was one girl everyone noticed, though she never tried to be seen. Her name was Isabella. She moved like a whisper, light, graceful, careful not to spill a drop or make a sound louder than necessary. She always wore her hair in a loose braid, her uniform perfectly pressed, and her sleeves rolled down no matter how hot the day was. People said she was polite but distant, like someone who lived behind invisible glass. The other workers liked her but also found her strange. She never talked about where she came from, never mentioned family, and never joined them for breaks or after-work dinners. She always smiled softly, said thank you, and left quietly. Her life seemed simple on the outside, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet sadness, like she was carrying a story no one had asked her to tell. Every morning, she arrived earlier than anyone else. She'd clean the tables, check the sugar jars, and line up the cups neatly on the counter. The owner, Mrs. Rossi, often watched her with a mix of curiosity and pity. "Such a good girl," she would whisper, but her heart looks tired. One rainy afternoon, the cafe was busier than usual. People rushed in to escape the downpour, shaking umbrellas and asking for hot coffee. Isabella moved between tables smoothly, her voice soft, her steps steady. That's when the door opened again and silence fell over the room. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside. His presence filled the cafe instantly. The chatter faded, the music seemed quieter, and even the air felt heavier. He wasn't just another customer, everyone knew that. The man was Vincenzo Moretti, one of the most feared and respected Mafia bosses in the city. Isabella didn't know who he was. She had heard the name before, whispered in fear by some customers, but she didn't recognize his face. To her, he was just another man looking for warmth from the rain. She picked up a tray and walked toward his table. "Good afternoon, sir," she said softly, her voice calm but careful. "What would you like to have?" He looked up, and their eyes met for the first time. His gaze was dark and unreadable, but there was something else behind it, something heavy, something human. He didn't answer for a moment, simply studying her face like it was a painting he had seen long ago. "Coffee," he finally said. "Black." She nodded and walked away, unaware that the man's world had just stopped turning. When she returned with his cup, he noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table, though her expression stayed calm. He noticed her long sleeves and the way she kept tugging them down, hiding her wrists. He was used to reading people, fear, guilt, lies, but this girl was different. She looked fragile, yet there was something strong in the way she held herself. Then, as she turned to leave, her sleeve caught on the edge of the table, slipping just an inch. For a brief moment, something small and delicate showed beneath the fabric, a tattoo. A simple design, an infinity symbol entwined with a rose vine. Vincenzo froze. His heart, which hadn't felt anything in years, skipped a beat. He knew that tattoo. He had seen it every night in his dreams. It was the same one his late wife, Lucia, had on her wrist, a mark they had designed together on the night of their wedding. His chest tightened. It couldn't be. Lucia had died 5 years ago in a car explosion, an attack meant for him. He had seen her body, or what was left of it. She was gone. He had buried her himself, and yet here it was, her tattoo on a stranger's skin. He stared at Isabella's back as she walked away, her braids swaying gently with each step. His mind raced. It had to be a coincidence, but how could it be? That exact design wasn't common. No one else had it. He clenched his jaw, trying to control the storm rising inside him. For the rest of the afternoon, he didn't touch his coffee. He just watched her, the way she smiled politely to customers, the way she tucked loose hair behind her ear, the way she never spoke unless spoken to. There was something hauntingly familiar about her gestures, her quietness, even the way she tilted her head. When she glanced his way once, their eyes met again. She looked startled for a second, maybe because of how intensely he was watching her, but then she quickly looked away. After she disappeared into the back room, he sat there for a long time, lost in thought. Memories of his wife flooded his mind. Her laughter, her soft voice, the night they got matching tattoos as a promise of forever. Forever. She had whispered. He thought forever had ended the day she died. But now, he left money on the table and stood up. The rain outside had stopped, but he barely noticed. As he stepped out of the cafe, he turned back for one last look. Through the window, he saw her wiping a table, unaware of the storm she had just awakened in him. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of the tattoo replayed in his mind again and again. He told himself it was impossible, that he was imagining things. But deep inside, something told him otherwise. And so, when the sun rose the next morning, Vincenzo made a decision. He would go back to that cafe. He would see her again. And he would find out who she really was, because the shy waitress who served him. Coffee might not just be a stranger. She might be a ghost from the past, one he thought he'd buried forever. The next morning arrived with a dull gray sky hanging over the city. The streets were still wet from the rain, and puddles reflected the flickering lights of passing cars. Inside the small cafe, the air was filled with the comforting smell of freshly ground coffee and baked pastries. The morning rush hadn't started yet, and only a few regular customers sat by the windows. Isabella moved quietly between the tables, her steps soft and steady. Her uniform was spotless, her hair neatly tied back, and her face carried the same calm expression she wore every day. To anyone watching, she was just a polite, hard-working waitress, the kind who never complained and always remembered your favorite drink. But inside, she carried a feeling she couldn't quite explain. Ever since the man from yesterday had walked in, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about him, his intense stare, his silence, his sharp eyes that seemed to look right through her. She tried to shake the feeling off. He was just a customer, she told herself. Just another person passing through. But something about him had unsettled her. There had been something familiar in his face, not in a way she could name, but in a way that made her heart ache for a reason she didn't understand. The cafe doorbell jingled softly, and her heart gave a little jump. When she turned, he was there again, Vincenzo Moretti, dressed in another dark suit, perfectly tailored, his hair slicked back, his expression calm but unreadable. The air in the cafe changed the moment he entered. The other customers went quiet, and even the owner, Mrs. Rossi, straightened nervously behind the counter. He nodded once at her and walked to the same table as before, the corner near the window, where shadows from the blinds fell across the floor. He sat down like he owned the place, though he never said a word. Isabella swallowed hard and picked up her notepad. She forced herself to move naturally, to smile as she approached him. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, her voice polite but small. "Would you like the same coffee as yesterday?" He looked up slowly. His eyes locked on hers for a few seconds, making her breath catch. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said, his voice deep and calm. "The same." She turned to leave, but he added quietly, "You work here every day?" She froze for a second before answering. "Yes, sir. Every day except Sunday." He hummed lowly, a sound between thought and interest. "Good. Consistency is important." She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and walked back to the counter. Her coworker, Sophia, nudged her playfully. He's been staring at you since he came in yesterday, she whispered. What did you do to catch that man's attention? Isabella blushed slightly. Nothing, she whispered back quickly. He's just a customer. But inside, she wasn't so sure. When she brought the coffee to his table, she noticed again how quiet he was. Most customers scrolled on their phones or chatted, but not him. He just sat there, eyes occasionally flicking toward her, like he was studying every detail, her movements, her expressions, even the way she held the tray. Thank you, he said when she placed the cup in front of him. You're welcome. Sir, she replied softly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. He didn't drink it right away. He watched the steam rise for a moment, then said quietly, Do you mind if I ask your name? She hesitated. Isabella? He repeated it slowly, like testing the sound. Isabella. Then a small, almost invisible smile touched his lips. Beautiful name. Thank you, she murmured, her cheeks warming. After that, he didn't ask anything else. But he stayed longer than most customers, long after his coffee had gone cold. When he finally left, he placed a large tip on the table. Too large. Isabella tried to call after him to return it, but he was already gone, stepping into a sleek black car waiting outside. That night, Isabella lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the strange way he looked at her, not with lust or anger, but with recognition, like he knew something she didn't. It made her uneasy. It made her wonder if he had seen something in her that even she couldn't see. Across the city, in a quiet, guarded mansion, Vincenzo sat in his private office. The room was filled with the faint smell of cigar smoke and the soft ticking of an old clock. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. On his desk lay an old photograph, one he hadn't looked at in years. It was of him and his wife, Lucia, standing by the seaside. She was smiling, sunlight touching her hair, and on her wrist was that same tattoo, the infinity symbol wrapped in a rose vine. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered to himself, It's impossible. He took a sip of whiskey, but the burn did nothing to calm him. He had seen that tattoo before, yesterday, on the wrist of a shy waitress who looked nothing like his wife, yet somehow carried her quiet grace. Her eyes were softer, her movements humbler, but her presence. It stirred something deep in him. He wasn't a man who believed in coincidences. Every symbol, every detail in his world had meaning. That tattoo wasn't just a random design. It was personal, intimate. And if this girl had it, then she was connected to Lucia in some way. He called one of his men, a tall, serious-looking bodyguard named Matteo. Find out everything about the girl at the cafe on Via Roma, he ordered. Name, address, family, everything. And don't let her notice. Matteo nodded. Understood, boss? When he was alone again, Vincenzo sat back and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt something he didn't understand, something between hope and fear. If this girl had any connection to Lucia, if she could tell him something about that night, then maybe he could finally understand what really happened. And as the clock struck midnight, he whispered to the empty room, Who are you, Isabella? Back in her small apartment, Isabella dreamed restlessly. Flames, broken glass, a man shouting her name, and then nothing but darkness. She woke up gasping for air, clutching her wrist where the tattoo burned faintly under her skin. Somewhere deep in her mind, a memory tried to surface, but it slipped away like smoke. She didn't know why she dreamed of fire, or why the sound of that man's voice, deep, familiar, full of pain, felt like it belonged to someone she once loved. Outside, thunder rolled softly, and the rain began to fall again. Neither of them knew it yet, but the past they both thought was buried was slowly beginning to awaken. The next few days passed in a blur of routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Isabella tried to work as she always did, quiet, careful, polite, but her thoughts were scattered. Every time the cafe doorbell rang, her heart jumped, half in fear, half in something else she couldn't name. And almost every day, at the same hour he came, Vincenzo Moretti, the man who carried an air of danger and sadness all at once. The man who never smiled but made the whole cafe go silent when he entered. He would sit in the same seat, order the same black coffee, and spend the next hour quietly watching the world, or maybe watching her. The staff had started whispering about him. "That man's from the underworld," one of the waiters said nervously. "He's got people who disappear." Another whispered, "Then why does he keep coming here?" "For her." And their eyes flicked toward Isabella. She tried to ignore the gossip, but it made her uneasy. She didn't understand why he kept coming back. Was it really just for the coffee? Or something more? Every time she served him, she felt his gaze on her, not hungry or cruel, but searching. Like he was trying to find an answer written somewhere on her face. One evening, near closing time, the cafe was nearly empty. Only Vincenzo remained, sitting in his usual corner, his half-empty cup untouched. Isabella was wiping down tables when he finally spoke. "You work too much," he said quietly. She stopped mid-motion and looked at him. "It's my job, sir." He tilted his head slightly. "You don't look like someone meant to serve coffee all day." "I don't mind it," she replied, her voice soft. "It's peaceful." He studied her for a moment, his dark eyes narrowing slightly, not with anger but curiosity. "Peaceful," he repeated, almost to himself. "That's a rare word in this city." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I like it." He said nothing for a while, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me something, Isabella. Where did you learn to speak like that?" She frowned, unsure what he meant. "Like what?" "Like you've lived two lives," he said softly. "One before and one after something broke." Her heart skipped a beat. The way he said it, calm but direct, felt like he was peering right into her soul. She looked down quickly. "I don't remember much about before," she admitted. "Only little things. Faces, sounds, maybe dreams. It's like trying to catch smoke." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or pain. "You lost your memory?" She hesitated. "After an accident?" "That's what the doctor said." "They found me on the side of the road 5 years ago. No ID, no family, just me. 5 years. The same year his wife, Lucia, had died." Vincenzo's heart pounded in his chest, but his face stayed calm. He didn't want to scare her, not yet. He needed to be sure. "Do you remember anything from before the accident?" She shook her head. "Sometimes I see flashes when I sleep. Fire, a man shouting my name, but the voice feels far away. I always wake up before I can see his face." His grip on the coffee cup tightened. His mind went back to that night, the explosion, the burning car, the chaos. He remembered shouting Lucia's name, running into the flames, and finding nothing but ashes. He had buried what he thought was her body, but there had been no face left to see, only a ring and a necklace. Now, 5 years later, this woman with the same tattoo, the same quiet spirit, and no memory appeared out of nowhere. He forced himself to stay composed. "That sounds terrible," he said softly. "I'm sorry you went through that." She nodded slightly, her eyes distant. "It's all right. Sometimes I think maybe forgetting was a blessing." Vincenzo wanted to tell her, wanted to grab her hands and say, "I know who you are. You're her." But he couldn't, not yet. He needed proof. If he was wrong, he'd destroy her peace for nothing. And if he was right, then everything he thought he buried had just come back to life. After a few moments, he asked, "The tattoo on your wrist, where did you get it?" Her hand froze. She instinctively pulled her sleeve down. I don't know, she said quickly. I've had it since before the accident, I think. The doctor said it might help identify me, but no one came. He nodded slowly, trying not to show the storm inside him. Do you know what it means? She looked at her wrist, the faint lines of the infinity symbol peeking out. I've always wondered, she said softly. It feels familiar, like it means something important, but I can't remember what. Vincenzo leaned back, his expression calm, but inside his heart was burning. He remembered the night he and Lucia got those tattoos together. She had said, no matter what happens, this mark will be our forever. Forever. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't from joy. It's a beautiful symbol, he said quietly. Some people get it to remind themselves that love never ends. Her eyes lifted to his. Do you believe that? He hesitated. Once, maybe. A silence filled the space between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy with something deeper, something both of them could feel but didn't dare to name. Finally, Isabella stood, breaking the moment. We're closing soon, sir, she said softly. Would you like anything else? He looked up at her for a long moment before answering. No, he said finally. You've already given me what I came for. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? But he only smiled faintly, finishing his now cold coffee. Good night, Isabella. When he left, the cafe felt strangely empty. That night, Isabella sat by her window, unable to sleep. Her wrists tingled where the tattoo was, and her chest felt heavy with thoughts she couldn't explain. Why did that man's voice sound like it belonged to her past? Why did his eyes make her heart ache, like she had known them once before? Meanwhile, in his mansion, Vincenzo stood by the fireplace, staring at the photograph of his late wife. He whispered into the quiet room, if it's really you, I'll find the truth. The flames flickered, casting shadows across the picture frame. In his hand, he held the small, worn necklace he had found at the crash site 5 years ago, a necklace that matched the tattoo dot now. There was only one thing left to do, uncover who Isabella truly was, because deep down, he already knew the shy waitress who served him coffee wasn't a stranger. She was the ghost he'd been chasing for half a decade. The following morning, the cafe felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the air itself carried secrets. Isabella arrived early as usual, but her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the front door. The world outside was gray and damp, and though she tried to focus on her work, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man who had come every day that week, Vincenzo Moretti. The stranger whose eyes felt both dangerous and familiar. The man who asked questions no one else dared to ask Dot. She kept telling herself it was just coincidence, that he was just another customer, but something deep inside her whispered otherwise. She could feel it every time his voice echoed in her memory. That low, calm tone. That gaze that seemed to hold both pain and longing. The bell above the cafe door rang, and she turned, half expecting it to be him again. But this time, it was a different man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket. His presence didn't feel right. He scanned the room before sitting at a corner table. Isabella's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to smile and approach. Good morning, sir. What would you like today? The man didn't answer immediately. He stared at her for a moment, then said, black coffee. No sugar. Something about his voice made her uneasy. When she walked away, she felt his eyes following her the whole time. Half an hour later, just as the man left, Vincenzo entered. His expression was unreadable as always, but his sharp eyes flicked toward the door the moment it closed. That man who just left, he said quietly, sitting down. Do you know him? She shook her head. No, sir. He just ordered coffee. Vincenzo's jaw tightened slightly. You're sure? Yes. He didn't respond right away. He simply tapped his finger lightly on the table, lost in thought. What she didn't know was that the man who just left was one of Marco's former associates, a rival who had once tried to destroy him. The fact that this man had suddenly appeared here, watching her, meant one thing. Someone had discovered Vincenzo's secret visits. "Do you walk home alone at night?" he asked suddenly. She hesitated, surprised. "Yes, it's only a few blocks away." "Not anymore," he said firmly. Her eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "You'll take my driver from now on," he said. "I don't want you walking home alone." She shook her head quickly. "That's not necessary, sir. I'm fine. No one bothers me." "It wasn't a suggestion," he said quietly, but his tone wasn't harsh, it was protective. She didn't know what to say. Her chest tightened in confusion. Why would he care? He was just a customer, wasn't he? The rest of the day passed in silence. He didn't ask more questions, and she didn't dare to. But when closing time came, she stepped outside and found a sleek black car waiting by the curb. A man in a suit got out and opened the door. "Miss Isabella," he said politely, "Mr. Moretti asked me to take you home." Her first instinct was to refuse, but the memory of that stranger's cold eyes in the morning made her pause. After a moment, she nodded and got in. The ride was quiet. The driver said nothing, only stopping outside her small apartment. As she stepped out, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street with tinted windows. Her heart skipped. It hadn't been there before. "Is that car with you?" she asked. The driver glanced toward it, his face calm but his hand tightening on the steering wheel. "Yes, miss. It's just precaution." Precaution. The word lingered in her mind long after she closed her apartment door. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring at the quiet street below. The city looked peaceful, but her chest was heavy with unease. Who were these people? Why did Vincenzo care what happened to her? And why, every time she saw his face, did her heart ache like it remembered something it couldn't name? Across the city, Vincenzo sat in his office, his hands clasped under his chin. Matteo stood in front of him, giving his report. The background check came back, Matteo said. "She's clean. No record, no family, no past before the accident 5 years ago. But I found something strange. Her hospital file was sealed under another name." Vincenzo's eyes narrowed. "What name?" Matteo handed him the folder. "Lucia Romano." Vincenzo froze. The name hit him like a blow. Lucia Romano, his wife's maiden name. He opened the folder, his heart pounding. Inside was a medical report describing a woman found unconscious near the Old Port District after an explosion. Severe burns, head trauma, temporary amnesia. The file had been transferred under a new identity weeks later, Isabella Conti. His throat went dry. He leaned back, closing his eyes. So it was true. She wasn't just a stranger. She was Lucia, his wife alive for 5 long years. He had believed she was gone. He had buried a casket that wasn't hers. And all this time, she had been alive, living as someone else, working as a waitress, serving him coffee with no memory of the man who once held her heart. The pain hit him hard, mixing with disbelief, joy, and guilt. How could he tell her now? How could he bring her back into his world after she'd finally found peace? When Matteo left, Vincenzo sat alone in the dark. He pulled out an old photograph from his desk drawer, their wedding day. Lucia had been smiling at him, sunlight in her hair. The small tattoo on her wrist barely visible under the lace sleeve. He whispered to the photo, "You came back to me." The next morning, he returned to the cafe again. She was already there, humming softly as she arranged the pastries. When she saw him, she smiled shyly, the way she always did. He looked at her differently this time, not as a stranger. Not as a waitress, but as the woman he had lost. The one who had once been his entire world. "Good morning." "Isabella," he said softly. "Good morning, sir," she replied. Unaware of the storm behind his calm voice, he watched her for a long moment before speaking again. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" She blinked, startled. "Dinner?" "Yes," he said simply. "There's something I need to tell you." Her heart began to race. Something in his tone felt final, important, like a door about to open into the past. She nodded slowly. "All right," as she turned away to hide the nervous smile forming on her lips. Vincenzo looked down at his hand, the hand that once wore a wedding ring. Tonight, he thought he would show her the truth, but deep down, he feared that the truth, as beautiful as it was, might also destroy the fragile peace she had built for herself. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and jasmine from the city gardens. The streets glowed under soft golden lights, and a calm breeze drifted through. Isabella stood in front of her small mirror, brushing her hair nervously. She hadn't gone out with anyone in years, let alone a man like Vincenzo. She didn't understand why he had invited her to dinner. Part of her thought it was just kindness, but another part felt something deeper, something she didn't dare to name. She chose a simple dress, pale blue with small white buttons, the kind that made her look modest and neat. She didn't have much jewelry, just a tiny silver pendant she'd worn since the day she woke up in the hospital 5 years ago. She didn't know where it came from, but somehow it always made her feel safe when she stepped outside the same black car from before was waiting. The driver greeted her politely, and they drove through the quiet streets until they reached an elegant Italian restaurant by the water. The lights shimmered on the waves, and for a moment, Isabella forgot to be nervous that Vincenzo was already there, standing near the entrance. He wore a dark suit, no tie, his hair perfectly in place. But tonight, there was something softer in his expression, less of the cold, unreadable boss and more of a man holding something heavy in his heart. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as she approached. Her cheeks warmed. "Thank you, sir." He smiled faintly. "Please call me Vincenzo." Inside, the restaurant was private and quiet. A single table by the window had been reserved for them, with soft candles flickering between glasses. The waiter poured wine and disappeared, leaving them alone. For a while, they talked about simple things: the cafe, the weather, the city lights outside. But even in the calm conversation, Isabella could sense that something deeper lingered under his voice. His eyes held a story he wasn't telling Dot at one point. She asked softly, "Why did you invite me here?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I think you deserve to know something. Something about who you really are." She blinked, confused. "Who I am?" "Yes." His voice was low, almost tender. "You said you lost your memory after the accident, didn't you?" She nodded slowly. "The doctor said I was lucky to survive, but I don't remember anything before waking up in the hospital." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you remember the year it happened?" 5 years ago," she whispered. "They told me it was an explosion, a car crash near the old port. I was burned and unconscious. They said there was no record of who I was before." His chest tightened. The old port. That was the same place where his wife, Lucia, had supposedly died. He had been there. He had seen the flames. He had heard her scream. He took a slow breath. "There's something I need to show you." From inside his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small velvet pouch and placed it gently on the table. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a silver locket, old, slightly burned at the edges. Her hands began to tremble. I've seen this before," she whispered, tears suddenly stinging her eyes. "Look inside," he said quietly. She opened the locket. Inside were two tiny photos, one of a smiling man in a dark suit, the other of a woman with gentle eyes and dark hair. Her wrist marked with a delicate tattoo, an infinity, symbol wrapped in a rose vine dot, the same tattoo Isabella had. Her breathing quickened. "That's me," she whispered, though her mind couldn't accept it. "But how?" Vincenzo's voice was soft but steady. "No, that's my wife, Lucia. She died, or I thought she did, 5 years ago. You were in that explosion. You lost your memory, and someone changed your name to Isabella." She shook her head in disbelief. "No, that's impossible. I'm not her. I can't be." He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Look at me, Isabella. You have her tattoo. You have her pendant. You survived that night." His voice cracked slightly. "I buried an empty coffin because they couldn't find your body. I thought I lost you forever." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't remember any of that," she whispered, shaking her head. "I don't remember you." He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes wet with emotion. "It doesn't matter if you remember. You're here now. You're alive." The room seemed to fade around them, the soft lights, the quiet music. Everything disappeared except the truth sitting between them. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "If what you're saying is true, then who saved me?" He hesitated, his voice growing darker. "That's what I intend to find out. But whoever it was, they hid you for a reason. Maybe they wanted to protect you, or maybe they wanted to keep you from me." The weight of his words sank into her heart. She looked down at the locket again, the same one she'd somehow kept all these years without knowing why. Her memories flickered in flashes, fire, glass shattering, a man shouting her name, the sound of sirens, then nothing. "Lucia," he whispered. The name slipped from his lips before he could stop it. She looked up, startled. "Lucia." The name felt strange on her tongue, but when she said it, something inside her shifted, like a door creaking open in her mind. "Does that name mean anything to you?" He asked softly. Her breath trembled. It feels familiar." He smiled sadly. "It's who you are." For a long moment, they sat in silence, eyes locked, both too overwhelmed to speak. Finally, Isabella whispered, "If I'm her, if I'm Lucia, then everything I've known for 5 years has been a lie." He reached out again, his voice low but firm. "No, it wasn't a lie. It was survival. But now you don't have to hide anymore." She wiped her tears, her hand shaking. "And if I can't remember you?" He looked at her gently, pain in his eyes. "Then I'll remind you. Every day, if I have to." Her lips parted, but no words came. The truth hung between them, fragile and heavy. That night, after he dropped her home, she sat by her window again, the locket resting in her hand. She turned it over again and again, tracing the tattoo in the photo. The more she stared at it, the more flashes came, laughter, a man's warm voice, the feeling of being held, a promise whispered against her skin. Forever. Tears ran down her cheeks as she looked out into the dark city and whispered the name that now felt like both a memory and a revelation. Lucia. And miles away. In his quiet mansion, Vincenzo sat in the dark, staring at a framed wedding photo. He touched the glass gently, whispering back to her across the distance, "You came back to me." The next morning began with a silence that felt heavier than the gray clouds outside. Isabella Lucia sat by her window, staring at the silver locket in her hands. Her mind was a storm of confusion and emotion. All night, her thoughts had been spinning around one truth she could no longer run from. She wasn't Isabella Conti, the quiet waitress with no past. She was Lucia Moretti, the wife of a Mafia boss she no longer remembered, but whose eyes, voice, and touch had started to awaken something deep inside her, The pendant glimmered faintly in the pale sunlight. It felt strange to hold something that connected her to a life she couldn't recall. She remembered flashes, now soft laughter, the scent of cologne, a man's arms around her, the warmth of love mixed with fear. Every time she tried to focus, the memory vanished like smoke dot at the same time. She felt something else, a strange pull toward Vincenzo. His presence both calmed and frightened her. The way he looked at her with such tenderness and pain made her heart ache, as though it already knew him, even if her mind, DID and single quotes T dot her quiet morning, was interrupted by a knock on the door. She stood and opened it, startled to see a familiar figure, Vincenzo's driver. Mrs. Moretti, he corrected himself quickly. The boss asked me to bring you to the mansion. Her pulse quickened. The mansion? Yes, ma'am. He said it's time you came home. Home. The word echoed in her mind. Could that place still be her home if she couldn't remember it? Still, she nodded silently, grabbed her small purse, and followed him to the car. The drive was quiet. The city slowly faded into the background, replaced by tall trees and long roads leading to a massive iron gate. As the gates opened, she saw a grand villa surrounded by fountains, gardens, and white stone walls. It was breathtaking, but it also felt strangely haunting, like a place from a dream she had long forgotten. When she stepped out, the guards of the entrance lowered their heads respectfully. She didn't understand why until she remembered. She was once the boss's wife. Vincenzo appeared at the top of the marble staircase. He looked the same as always, strong, confident, dressed in black, but there was something softer in his eyes when he saw her. Welcome home, Lucia, he said quietly. She hesitated before answering, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can call it that yet. He nodded slowly. I understand, but it's still where you belong. He led her inside. The house was enormous, elegant, filled with art and memories she couldn't grasp. Each hallway seemed to whisper pieces of her forgotten life. When they entered his study, he poured her a cup of tea and said, You lived here for years. You loved this place. You loved us. She looked around the room. Her fingers brushed over the piano in the corner. Without thinking, she sat down and pressed a single key. The sound filled the room, a soft note that somehow felt familiar. Her eyes watered. I know this piano, she whispered. You used to play every evening, he said quietly. You said music made you feel free. She looked up at him. Did we love each other? He smiled faintly, sadness flickering behind it. More than I ever thought possible. You were my reason for everything. Her heart fluttered, but before she could reply, a loud knock broke the quiet moment. Matteo, Vincenzo's trusted man, entered quickly. Boss, he said, glancing nervously at Lucia, we've got a problem. Someone's been asking about her people connected to Marco's old crew. Lucia frowned. Marco? Vincenzo's jaw tightened. He was one of my men. The one who betrayed me. The one who caused the explosion that took you from me. Her eyes widened. You mean he tried to kill us? Yes, Vincenzo said, his voice low. He wanted my power. When he couldn't reach me, he targeted you. Lucia's hands trembled. And he knows I'm alive? Maybe not yet, Vincenzo said, but someone close to him does. We need to be careful. He turned to Matteo. Double the guards around the property. No one gets near her without my permission. Matteo nodded and left quickly. When the door closed, Lucia turned to him. Vincenzo, why didn't you tell me all of this before? Why bring me here if it's dangerous? Because you're safer here than anywhere else, he said firmly. And because I couldn't stand watching you live as a stranger any longer. You deserve to know the truth. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't even know how to live this truth. I don't remember who I was. I don't remember being your wife. All I know is that the life I had as Isabella was quiet and simple, and now everything feels heavy. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. You don't have to remember all at once. I'm not asking for that. I just want you to feel safe again. That's all. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the cold mafia boss everyone feared. She saw a man broken by loss, trying to hold on to the one piece of light that had returned to him. Do you believe me now? He asked softly. She nodded slowly. Yes, I don't remember, but I can feel that you're telling the truth. He smiled faintly and reached into his coat. There's something else you should see. He handed her a small framed photo. It was of the two of them, smiling, standing by the sea. Her hair was loose, his arm around her shoulders. She looked happy, whole. A tear slid down her cheek. That's me, she whispered, almost to herself. That's us. He corrected gently. Before either could say more, a loud noise echoed outside, shouting. Footsteps, the sound of gun metal clinking. Vincenzo's expression hardened instantly. He moved toward the window, pulling out his gun. What's happening? Lucia cried, standing up in panic. He turned to her quickly. Stay here. Don't move. She grabbed his arm. Vincenzo, please. He met her eyes, his voice low but fierce. I lost you once. I won't lose you again. Then he was gone, the sound of his footsteps fading into the chaos outside. Lucia stood frozen, her heart pounding. The gunfire that followed made her flinch, memories of flames and screams flashing behind her eyes. She grabbed the photo frame, clutching it tightly. Outside, Vincenzo and his men fought to push back the intruders. They weren't amateurs. These were organized men, likely sent by the remnants of Marco's gang. Someone had told them Lucia was a live in the chaos. One thought burned in Vincenzo's mind. They found her. Inside, Lucia hid behind the piano, shaking, whispering his name over and over as the sound of gunfire roared closer, and in that moment, something inside her memory cracked open. She saw the explosion again, fire glass, Vincenzo shouting her name, the feel of his hand slipping from hers, then everything went black. But this time, when she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the flames. She was in his house, holding their picture. He had found her, and she had finally begun to remember. The gunfire echoed through the mansion like thunder, shaking the windows and rattling the walls. Lucia crouched behind the piano, her heart pounding so fast it hurt. Every sound made her flinch, the shouts, the breaking glass, the sharp crack of bullets hitting marble. She clutched the framed photo of her and Vincenzo to her chest, whispering his name under her breath as if that alone could keep him alive. Outside the room, chaos raged. Vincenzo's men fired from the balconies and hallways, shouting commands. The smell of smoke and gunpowder filled the air. But through it all, Vincenzo moved like a storm, precise, calm, deadly. He had faced enemies before, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just another fight for power or control. This was about her. The woman he thought he'd buried 5 years ago was alive, breathing in his house, and now someone was trying to take her again. When the last of the attackers fell, silence returned, heavy and eerie. The echoes of violence lingered in the air, mixing with the faint hum of rain beginning to fall outside. Vincenzo stepped back into the study, his shirt stained with smoke and a streak of blood across his arm. Lucia ran to him, her hands shaking. You're hurt. He waved her off gently, his breathing steady. It's nothing. I'm fine. She looked around at the chaos, the shattered glass, the holes in the walls, the books scattered across the floor. Who were they? Marco's men, he said coldly. Or what's left of them. I told you they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. And what do they want? She whispered. He turned to her, his expression dark. You. They found out you're alive. And to them, you're more valuable than gold. the one person who can break me. Her heart sank. Then it's my fault. I brought this danger to your door. He stepped closer and cupped her face in his hands, his voice low but firm. No, Lucia. You didn't bring it. They did. You didn't choose this life. But you survived it. That makes you stronger than any of them. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't feel strong. You're here, aren't you? He said softly. That's strength. She stared up at him, her heart twisting. For the first time, she truly saw him, not the ruthless mafia boss people feared, but the man who had once loved her so deeply that losing her nearly destroyed him, Vincenzo. She whispered, What happens now? He sighed, stepping back, his eyes softening. Now we protect what's left. The men will guard the house. No one leaves without my permission. Matteo's already tracing where the order came from. Whoever's behind this, I'll finish it. But Lucia shook her head. And then what? More blood? More revenge? Haven't we both lost enough? He froze. Her words cut deeper than any bullet. You think this is who I wanted to become? He said quietly. After you were gone, I built this empire not out of ambition, but out of rage. I thought I was honoring you, keeping control, keeping power, but all I did was build walls around my grief. Lucia took a shaky breath. And now? He looked at her for a long moment. Now? You remind me of who I used to be. A tear rolled down her cheek. Without thinking, she reached out and touched the side of his face. I don't remember everything, she said softly, but I remember this. You always looked at me like that, like I was the only thing that made you breathe. He smiled faintly, pain flickering behind his eyes. You still are. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping softly against the windows. The moment hung between them, fragile and real dot suddenly. Matteo burst into the room, his face tense. Boss, we caught one alive. Vincenzo's expression hardened instantly. Where? In the garage. He says he wants to talk to you, says it's about her. Lucia's stomach twisted. About me. Vincenzo nodded to Matteo. Bring him in. A few minutes later, 2 guards dragged in a bruised man, his hands tied, his face bloodied. He glared at Vincenzo, then at Lucia. So it's true, the man sneered. The ghost wife lives. Vincenzo stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. Who sent you? The man laughed weakly. You already know who. The same people who helped her disappear 5 years ago. The ones who made sure you'd never find her. Lucia's heart stopped. What do you mean help me disappear? The man smirked. You think that explosion was an accident? She was saved, pulled out before the fire reached her. Someone made sure she lost her memory, gave her a new name. They wanted to protect her from you. Vincenzo's eyes turned cold as steel. Protect her from me? From your world, the man spat. They said she'd never be free as long as she stayed with you. The room fell silent. Lucia's breathing grew uneven. It was true. Her memory had been stolen, her life rewritten. But now, for the first time, she wondered if maybe they hadn't been wrong. Vincenzo grabbed the man by the collar. Who? The man coughed, blood dripping from his lip. Someone close to you. Closer than you think? Before Vincenzo could press further, the man's body went limp. A sudden shot from outside had silenced him forever. The guards ran toward the windows, but the shooter was already gone. Vincenzo cursed under his breath, fury flashing across his face. Whoever's behind this still has reach. Lucia stood frozen, her heart racing. You said someone close to you? Who could that be? He turned to her, his voice soft but laced with pain. I don't know, but I'll find out. And when I do, his eyes darkened. No one will ever hurt you again. She looked at him, torn between fear and something stronger. the pull of a love she couldn't fully remember but could still feel. Vincenzo, she whispered, her voice shaking. If I lost my memory because someone wanted to save me from this world, maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't meant to come back. He froze, staring at her. Don't say that. She met his gaze, her eyes full of pain. You're still fighting ghosts, still living in blood. I see it every time you pull that gun. Maybe I was supposed to start over. Maybe that's why I forgot. He took a slow step toward her, his voice trembling. If fate gave me a second chance to find you, do you really think I'd let you go again? Her eyes filled with tears. And if holding on to me destroys you? He shook his head, his hand reaching for hers. Then I'll be destroyed with you. For a long moment, they just stood there, two souls caught between past and present, between love and pain. Outside, thunder rumbled. The storm hadn't passed yet, but something had shifted inside both of them. The truth had begun to surface, and with it came the realization that their story wasn't just about loss and revenge. It was about a love strong enough to fight through fire, lies, and time itself. As the rain poured down harder, Lucia whispered, her voice breaking, I don't remember everything, but I think I remember how it felt to love you. And Vincenzo, the man who had once built an empire on rage, closed his eyes and whispered back, then that's enough for me. The storm passed quietly that night, leaving the world washed clean. Morning sunlight slipped through the tall windows of the Moretti mansion, casting golden light across the marble floors. The chaos of the night before was gone. The gunfire, the shouting, the fear, all replaced by a stillness that felt almost fragile. Lucia sat on the edge of her bed, wrapped in a soft robe. Her hair was damp from the shower, her thoughts even heavier than before. She stared down at her hands, small, trembling, marked by a tattoo she finally understood. That tiny infinity symbol wrapped in roses wasn't just a design. It was a promise. A forever. She remembered now, not everything, but enough. The laughter they'd shared. The wedding by the sea. The warmth of his hand holding hers when life still felt safe. And then the fire, the betrayal, the explosion. She had run from that world, even if her mind had forgotten it. But her heart never had. A quiet knock broke her thoughts. She turned, and there he was, Vincenzo, standing in the doorway. His white shirt sleeves were rolled up, a small bandage around his arm from the night's fight. He looked tired but calmer, his usual sharpness softened by something almost peaceful. Can I come in? He asked. She nodded. You don't have to ask. He stepped inside, his shoes quiet against the floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, the Mafia boss who had once ruled with fear, and the woman who had unknowingly broken and rebuilt his heart. You didn't sleep, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. Neither did you. He sighed, sitting down across from her. I used to think that finding you again would fix everything. That if I could just hold you, the pain would stop. But last night made me realize something. She tilted her head. What? That love isn't about keeping someone, he said softly. It's about protecting them, even if it means letting them go. Her chest tightened. Are you saying you want me to leave? He looked down for a moment, his hands clasped together. I don't want you to. But I've lived my whole life surrounded by danger, by enemies. You deserve peace, Lucia. You deserve a life without looking over your shoulder. I can't give you that. Her eyes filled with tears. But I don't even know who I am without you. Yes, you do, he said gently. You found a way to live when the world thought you were gone. You built something quiet, kind, and pure. That's who you are, not my shadow, not the boss's wife, but you. Lucia looked at him, tears slipping down her cheeks. And what about you? He smiled faintly. I'll survive. I always do. But knowing you're alive, that's enough. She shook her head, her voice trembling. You don't get to save me and then send me away. He chuckled softly, though his eyes glistened. You always were stubborn, and you always were impossible, she said, a small laugh breaking through her tears. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You remember that? She met his gaze. I remember how you made me feel safe, loved, like I wasn't just someone living in the middle of chaos. He smiled, a real quiet smile that softened the lines of his face. Then maybe that's enough to start over. She blinked. Start over? He nodded slowly. No more hiding, no more lies. We leave this behind, the guns, the power, all of it. I'll walk away if it means keeping you. Her eyes widened. You'd give it all up? For you? He exhaled, his voice steady. I already lost everything once. I'm not losing you again. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The world outside faded. All she saw was him, the man she had loved in another life, the man she was learning to love again in this one. She took his hand, her voice soft but sure. Then we leave together. His breath caught, and for the first time in years, he felt hope. Pure, unguarded, real. They stood together by the window, watching the sun climb higher. Below, the guards moved quietly, the staff beginning their day as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed, something that couldn't be undone. Later that afternoon, Vincenzo gathered his men in the main hall. They stood in silence as he spoke. I built this empire out of blood and loyalty, he said, his voice calm and commanding. But the time has come for me to end it. Matteo will take over operations. I'm done. The room was stunned. No one spoke, not even Matteo, who looked at his boss in disbelief. You're serious? He asked. Yes, Vincenzo said simply. I've spent too many years fighting ghosts. It's time to live for something real. When he turned, Lucia was standing in the doorway, watching. The light caught her hair, and for a moment, she looked like the same woman from their wedding photo, the one who had once been his entire reason for breathing Dot as he walked toward her. Matteo nodded with respect. Good luck, boss. Vincenzo smiled faintly. Not boss anymore. Just a man trying to live. He took Lucia's hand, and together they walked out of the mansion. The guards opened the gates, and the car rolled down the long driveway. Neither of them looked back. Hours later, they stood by the ocean, the wind tugging at their clothes. The water shimmered under the fading sun, the same sea where they had once promised forever. Lucia took off her pendant and held it out to him. This belongs to both of us. He looked at it for a moment before gently closing her fingers around it again. No, he said softly. It belongs to you. You carried it through the fire. It's yours. She smiled through her tears. Then I'll keep it as a reminder of the life we lost. And the one we found again. Vincenzo nodded, his eyes glistening. No more secrets? She shook her head. No more lies. The wind brushed past them, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. He reached for her hand and she leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. For a long time, they stood there in silence, watching the waves roll in, two people who had been broken by fate but healed by love. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, he whispered softly against her hair, forever. She smiled, her voice barely louder than the wind. Forever. The sea roared in agreement, the waves washing over the shore like a promise renewed. This time, there would be no fire, no loss, no forgetting, only two souls who had finally found their way home.